We heard earlier from clients. It's now turn to hear from agencies, and we've assembled a panel which has travelled from far, so thank you to all of you for coming. Penny Burgess is MD China of We Redbridge. She and her partner recently sold their business sensibly to another independent, not to one of the big holding groups, so well done, Penny. Yeah. And next to Penny is Cobus van Zyl, who represents Africa on this panel and is CEO of Aggrey and Clifford, an integrated advertising agency with a network based in Tanzania. From India is my old friend Nitin Mantri, who's a partner and CEO of Avian Media. They're the country's leading communications consultancy with over 150 staff in 6 markets. And last but certainly not least is Sonya Medeira, founder of Singapore-based Rise Communications. Thank you, Sonya, for filling the breach at the last minute and stepping in for another panelist who couldn't be here. So we heard talk earlier from the clients of what do they love and hate about their agencies. I'm not going to be so confrontational, but I'd love to ask the panelists to give us a few thoughts each on what they like and perhaps like less, because we all love our clients, of course, about our clients. So Penny, perhaps you would be kind enough to start.
Sure. I love it when we work in a true partnership with our clients, because simply I think it's just when the best work gets done. So when they bring us in as an insider and kind of give us insight into their business, knowledge is power, and we can then use that knowledge to actually go out and develop really powerful campaigns. So that's something I love. Pet peeves, again, going back to knowledge is power, really bad briefs or very brief briefs that are very open-ended, makes it very challenging. I also think that it's quite hard when we're sort of given to the point earlier with the client discussion earlier, that you are, we want to be disruptive, come to us with big ideas, so we go away, we get really excited, we say, are there any budget parameters? No, just think big. So we go out and think really big, get all excited, come back, present the idea, and they go, that is amazing. The budget, however, is, and it's kind of pretty much like a fraction of it. And, you know, particularly in the comms industry, our ideas can be very scalable and obviously always looking to deliver value. But, you know, some guidance sometimes on budget parameters is useful. So
more transparency is what I'm hearing on both sides of the equation. Cobus?
I think my answer might be a little bit left field. I love Africa, and I love, you know, the potential of Africa. So the thing about unearthing the potential, though, is you need a particular kind of individual, which is a maverick and a risk taker and so on. So I think what I love about my clients is when they walk through our doors, they usually are those kind of individuals. They're prepared to take a risk. They're prepared to try something new. They're prepared to go with, you know, a solution that's, as I say, completely left field. So I love that. What I hate about my clients is I'd say the fact that they keep leaving me. and I don't mean for other agencies. I mean in terms of marketing expertise in the African market, it's not as readily available. So you often find that the top positions are filled by expatriates. And if it's available locally, they move around because, you know, there's a pricing war going on. So I'd go even further and say if there's, for me, a real barrier to entry in terms of building brands in the African markets, it is that lack of organizational memory that's built. I mean, to give you an extreme example, we had one client that we were on for 3 years, and during that time we went through 5 different marketing directors. You know, so to hear some of the panelists earlier talk about being on a brand or with a company for 11 years is music to my ears. You know, so for me that lack of continuity is really tough to deal with, especially in the relationship too. You know?
Could be an opportunity, of course, because those clients go elsewhere and then perhaps want to work with you again.
It could be, and that has in fact happened.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And Nitin, in India, obviously it's more developed probably than Africa, but still developing very fast. Do you find that same kind of trend? And what are the things that frustrate you and also please you about working with clients?
Yeah, I think I'll agree with Penny. I think the idea of having a true partnership working on, and I think clients in India are also recognizing the power of content-driven kind of campaigns, and I think we're doing a lot of that. Clients are willing to do that. one peculiar problem to India is talent. And I think many times you have incompetent clients, but that's a fact. And they don't understand when there's a consultancy here trying to explain, and but you're just hitting a brick wall all the time. And as Penny mentioned, you've got these wonderful ideas, and suddenly you say, oh, we love the ideas, but we're not going to do it because they just don't get it. So, and that's a big challenge.
Sonya, just building on that last comment, presumably it's part of our role to interrogate the client more thoroughly and to try to get to the heart of what they want and the parameters they're working with. Do you think as agencies we're good enough at pre-qualifying those opportunities and engaging with the client at that stage, even when we're pitching or even when we're working with them? And what sort of other challenges do you face in Singapore?
I don't think many agencies actually go into any client briefs with with the full questionnaire and tick off all the boxes and then decide whether they want to pursue that lead or not. Maybe we should do more of that, like balanced scorecarding for a prospect. Unfortunately, we don't. We tend to see the brand more than anything else. But in Singapore, the biggest challenge we face is that the people movement. So the question that Gisem asked was very, very relevant. How many of us would want to work for a brand, go in-house? We're all sitting here as agency leaders and agency heads. And maybe it's a different kind of personality, but a lot of people are very happy to work in an agency for a couple of years, and then they go in-house and they become our client contacts. And perhaps they don't have necessarily the breadth of experience to be having those conversations with us. So I didn't get a chance to answer what I love about working with our clients, and that is when we really get, Singapore is a wonderful regional hub. We've got like 7,000 companies, either regionally or globally headquartered there. So when the regional heads or the CEOs get engaged with us, then it's so much more exciting to be in a dialogue with them rather than with I'm not dissing the marketing or the comms teams, but it's just a more wholesome, a much wider conversation.
I think that's an issue for the whole industry, which is how we engage with the C-suite, which is a subject in its own right. We heard the last speaker talk about volatility, speed, and change being the only constant. And Penny, We Communications has just, hot off the press, published the beginnings of a study in 3 markets, China, the UK, and the US, to try and understand the emotional as well as rational drivers that are feeding consumers and driving consumers, and how companies as a result need to be in continual motion and never standing still. And that's all the more so, not just because of the regulatory issues that companies face and the competitive issues, but also, of course, because as we've heard this morning so often about technology. Do you want to just give us a couple of minutes of a taster for what that study is beginning to show? Yeah,
I think it's touched on a lot of the points that have been raised today, that we are living in a society now where there is constant change. Technological advancements now are so rapid that it's being very disruptive, I think, to nearly all industries. So what we've gone out really is to kind of speak with the consumers and B2B influencers to really understand what are those drivers that are informing consumer choices today in this changing climate. And the insight that's really come back is that traditional positioning that is static is really a sort of a dead notion. In this day and age, brands are constantly moving and in motion. And really what's important is for sort of brand owners to really be asking the question is, what is propelling their brand? Is it the motion and the transformation of their own company, or is it those external factors? And if so, what are they, and how is it pushing them forward? So the study has really tried to look at across the UK, the US, and China, sort of what are those driving factors and what are the differences? So very interesting to me is that the Chinese consumers were most optimistic about brands and the Brits were very skeptical. So as a Brit in China, I was a bit like, well, maybe I'm going to have some happy surprises then, because I'll always go in kind of with the glass half empty, but hopefully things will look up. But there are differences, and what we've done is try to really map these insights. We've looked at 8 different sectors, and then look at how they fit into a matrix around sort of emotional and functional drivers. And what we've come is into a sort of 4 base categories. So we look at the movers, and those are those brands that have really kind of very attuned to their own motion and to the motion that's around them, but through the sort of external environmental factors. So these guys are sort of really in that high functional and high emotional appeal. And then conversely, we look at the survivors, and these tend to be more the sort of FMCG brands where, you know, there's the functionality there, but there's really no emotional connection as well. And I think for us, where we work in China very closely is actually more with those brands that are around the sort of agitators. These are the guys that are the game changers that are coming in and creating very high emotional connectivity with consumers. And yet the functional value they're delivering is sometimes questionable. And I think, you know, we see this a lot now with those disruptive challenger brands coming in, the Airbnbs, the Ubers of this world that are coming in and changing the game. So I think, you know, from the consensus of this is that it really just taps into a lot of the conversations earlier today, that nothing is static, that brands are constantly evolving. And it's not really now about thinking about your heritage and the legacy of the brand. It's really about looking forward in terms of what is the purpose of your company and the brand, and what is your place in society. Because one thing that came out very, very strongly is that brands that are perceived as being cutting edge, you know, are not just seen as high tech, but they're seen as brands that consumers can really relate to, that have a place and a role in society. And, you know, and being socially minding is something that, as a quality for a brand, is just gaining more and more equity.
Absolutely.
So that's sort of a top line, and we're still digging through the data.
Thank you for that. One of the things that's been mentioned quite a few times this morning is the regulatory environment and the importance of companies and organisations and brands engaging with governments, and we've seen all the turmoil that's obviously happening in the political world. And if I think about India, Nitin, I think about a market that you and I might disagree, but I think it's a little bit unwelcoming to foreign business, and with heavy regulation, you must therefore find that a lot of your clients need regulatory advice and support as well as brand building support. And how does that affect what you give to clients and what they ask for you in that market?
Well, yeah, I do disagree. So I don't think the market is unwelcoming for foreign business. I think it's very welcoming. I think what is the challenge is the bureaucracy, actually, when companies do come in, and that's something inherited from the Brits, actually. Mm-hmm. So it still continues. And I think what consultancies are doing today is, one, apart from just holding hand, taking them through the process, I think what is giving insights. I think insights is very critical. And from a product perspective, a brand perspective, they need to be hyperlocal. And you know, we've had examples of McDonald's or Kellogg's or Uber, all have gone really hyperlocal in India. And what's working outside of India is not working there. In fact, I compare India a lot to Europe in a way, with, you know, 29 states is almost like 29 countries with different culture, different language, different media. Yeah. And those three, and that makes it all the more complex and difficult for clients to navigate. And I think regulation is important. It's there. It's the enforcement which is also a challenge. And we do a lot of work with defense clients, for example, and things take long. Clients just need to have patience. The last deal that happened, which for one of the defense procurements, took 10 years. So it takes long, but sure, that's the nature of the game.
It's a long game, yeah. Sonya, if I look at the Singapore market, you've mentioned some of this already. It's a sophisticated market. It's headquarters for a lot of businesses in Southeast Asia. It's a big spender in terms of the Singapore government and communications, and they understand the importance of that. If you look at yourself as an independent agency based there, and you look at all the holding companies who've got big operations there and you're competing against them, what would you say are the things that help you being an independent agency, and what are the things that kind of are constraints or hold you back?
It's attending events like this. I mean, from this morning, I realized I have to future-proof my leadership and keeping like the world trends in mind. You know, see what I can do in my lifetime, but also make sure that you know, clients are getting what they want. You know, where is Globalia, and how do I set up an organization headquartered there? It means Singapore's always had a lot of competition when it comes to the marketing communications world. Yeah. And I think Lisa in the morning, you know, mentioned speed and agility. And yes, you know, we do as much as we can, and hopefully, you know, faster and better than some organizations. But like we were looking at the brand, the client side, people on stage this morning, every client contact and client situation is different. And therefore, there were, you know, there've always been opportunities for the Ogilvies and the Edelmans and for guys like us. I mean, we have taken a few really big clients of some networks in the last few years, and I'd like to see that continue to happen. And just last week, we won Southeast Asia Consultancy of the Year. So it was not for a particular industry, but from the market against some of the larger players as well. So, you know, hopefully we just keep doing good stuff and moving that along. What I wish we had is possibly a lot more money to just invest and try, you know, innovative things. But, you know, we tend to get carried away and, okay, you know, there's these new pitches coming up, we've got these client projects in hand, you know, we need more people. So, I mean, that's the first struggle, you know, forget, you know, really having the time to trying out anything new. But having said that, we look for opportunities where we can, and you know, going back to the client education process, we're in a very nascent market, which is Burma, Myanmar. We've been in there for 2 years, and a big challenge there is the education system is not equipped to produce the talent that we need to hire there. So we've launched a program there, and we're going to be, you know, giving courses to communications professionals pro bono for the next year.
Very good.
You know, so we invest and hope for the best.
And I think one of the lessons we learned this morning from our German friend, who I thought was amazing, is about focus. So absolute focus on what you're best at and concentrating on that. Cobus, if I look at Africa, if I sit in London as I do, although I travel a lot, and I think about the sophistication of the marketing services industry here, and then I think about Africa, a lot of us here would disparagingly perhaps think that it was maybe more second-rate, maybe less creative, maybe less sophisticated. We'd also probably think of consumers as being perhaps less sophisticated or not as attuned to what they really need and want. And yet, having travelled to Africa, I know that's not the case. And yet then, so I've got a very strong feeling about the future of the industry in Africa. And yet I hear you saying today that a large part of your business is sending guys on motorbikes to villages to sell cigarettes and promote cigarettes. So, you know, how advanced is the industry? What sort of challenges do you have? You're running a Tanzanian-based network.
So I'm glad you mentioned the agency and the consumer in terms of sophistication, because I think you know the stigma that sit with both of them in terms of sophistication. I've obviously heard. I think both of them are changing at a rate of knots, and it's a complex thing to understand in which way it's changing. You know, and I also think what's very important is the two feed each other. You know, the one can only perform as well as the other one, you know, understands the work, and you know, vice versa. So, you know, if I look at, you know, the sort of journey in Africa, 20 years ago, if you went and did work into the African market, it was a very hairy place to do business. So, unreliable power and water, and you know, very expensive hotels, and you know, flights to countries were once or twice a week, and so on. In the last 20 years, it has changed, you know, a lot, because I think that, you know, the economies have started to liberalize a lot, and a lot of brands have come into the market. But it's created a consumer that, on the one hand, is, as you put it, very unsophisticated. And I'll give you an example. We did a launch for a whiskey. So it's a 3-year-old Scottish blend into the market, and we went and we surveyed 100 bar owners and bartenders just to try and see what the you know, as part of the process, what the insights would be. And for me, the shocking part was that more than 50% of these people do not understand the difference between a brandy and a whiskey. Now, these are the people who are selling it. Forget about the end consumer who you're trying to, so we are a million miles away from, things like single malts and triple distilled and the Scottish Highlands, So, on the one hand, but on the other hand, you have a consumer that is very aware that Jamie Foxx is drinking something brown in the back of a limousine because he has very reliable 4G internet, So it's a very complex consumer. The agency, on the other hand, again, deservingly has that label. And I think, if there's one thing that stands out for me today, if you look at all the maps and the stats, Africa is missing, from all of that. And I think something that has happened over the years, I don't think the networks did the advertising industry any favors, because if you look at any presentation by a network on their world map, they're in every African country. The only way it's possible is because it's untrue, So I think the people who have sat behind those dots on the maps have sometimes been one guy, who's not competent. So that's the one part of it. I think the other part is that, because it hasn't been a very big business destination, a lot of the work has been adaptation work, So I think that's the last kind of 20 years. But even in the last 5 years, I've seen a big shift in terms of budget move towards locally originated work. So I think that's definitely, but then it presents you with a lot of new dilemmas, because to produce good work, you need good talent. But good talent only comes to a place that allows them to do good work, So
that deep local knowledge is really, really important.
Yeah.
What about the move by consultancies, management consultancies into our space, Penny? We've seen a lot of acquisitions recently by PwC, Accenture, and some others. We heard the IBM lady talk this morning about their own in-house agency. How do we see ourselves relating to those organizations, joining up with them, partnering with them, trying to compete with them? We've heard about data, and obviously those organizations have got huge capabilities when it comes to data. Do you see that happening in China with the consultancy firms, or not yet?
Yeah, we seem to compete with everybody these days. It's not just the PR agencies, everybody from event agencies through to management consultancies. So it makes it quite challenging. And I think, again, though, it depends on where you want to focus your business, because you can't be all things to all people. Data and analytics, I think quality of planning is absolutely key to ensure that we within the communication industry can hold our own against the management consultants. I think they're very good at giving business consultancy. I think where they fall down is the fact that for most of us, we're in the engagement era now. It's about not just having strategy, but it's the sustained conversations with consumers and different stakeholder groups. And I think, this is where I'm a huge advocate that PR agencies have got a great opportunity in the future, because we've always been the storytellers. We have always been the ones that have been relationship builders. And now we just need to do it through a much more complex channel landscape. But I think, we definitely still have an opportunity to hold our own against the management consultancies. But I think it's ensuring that we have those insights, because at the end of the day, if you don't have the data and the insights, then your strategy is never going to be strong enough. And this is where I think they're exceptionally good. Because
we've got 3 heads of PR companies and one head of an ad agency. We heard this morning that survey about how most clients think they're going to want to use less agencies, consultancies moving forward. They want to see consolidation. So how do you deal with that, guys, in your markets, and how are you trying to morph and change your business to deal with that? Are you trying to bring in new skills? Are you trying to partner? What's the answer? Or are you just holding your nose and hoping that things won't change too quickly?
So firstly, in India, what you're saying is, I'm just taking on from what Penny was saying, we're seeing a lot of challenge in the public policy and regulation in the government affairs space, from challenge from consultancies. In terms of services, I think today we haven't seen that much consolidation. In fact, the problem in India is that there are 3 or 4 different set of clients who are looking at 3 or 4 different services with 3 or 4 different people, and they actually want to keep everybody in different silos, because they don't want them to interfere with each other. And what we are trying to do is integrate. And there's a pushback from the client side. Are we offering everything? Yes, we are. So we are saying, yes, we can bring in all the services, whether it's government, digital, PR, not advertising though, but we bringing it all together. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think for us also we integrated by our very nature. So you spoke earlier about the 100 guys on motorcycles. So that came from a need. A client of ours at a tobacco company where they, after all these years, they also finally had their media blackout. We were still allowed to go on billboards till about 3 years ago, but so they've moved all that spend to market activations, and then together we designed a solution where we take their product for what we call the last mile distribution. So they deliver to their distributor, but then our guys show up on the motorbikes and take it into the market, into the guys who sell 10 and 15 cigarettes kind of a day, or at the smaller shops. But what's interesting about that is the application we've developed with it. So every guy has a smartphone, and as he goes along, he tracks his performance. So the client sets out the KPIs before the project starts, and our men keep tracking how they're performing. So there's obviously a back end that we can manage as the agency, but there's the client side of it where they can literally sit in London and go onto their application, and we've geomapped the entire country, and they can know exactly where this person is and what they're busy with. While they're busy collecting that kind of data, if you just turn it around and say we're selling tot packs of gin, we can also collect other data in terms of what radio station are you really listening to and when do you listen to it, and that data, which is often missing in a developing market, can be used to inform the media strategy within the same organization. And as they're distributing tot packs of gin, I've got a team on the side who's busy activating,
So there's an example of a developing market where you've leapfrogged in terms of use of technology to benefit the client, and you haven't got that sort of legacy. You haven't got those legacy issues in place which prevent you from doing that, which is a big opportunity.
Yep.
One last chance for a question. If not, I've got one last one. Hi, please, the gentleman in the middle. If someone can find the orange ball and safely throw it to him. Almost. Well done.
Misha from Ukraine, Pepelets Production. A question I would like to relate to our previous speaker, Dr. Simon, who mentioned that China will become one of the biggest export countries. Mm-hmm. So either from your previous experiences or from your knowledge, what challenges will Chinese brands or Chinese companies have to roll out globally or regionally? And as well as for India or for Africa, but specifically for China. Thank you.
I think it comes back to sort of, there's two things. One is the perception of made in China, which is still, a brand challenge for a lot of companies and organizations. So they're looking at, again, how they adapt their strategy from a domestically focused one to an internationally focused one. And a lot of that then actually comes back to our previous speaker in terms of talent. Identifying talent that can actually have that local understanding, but also that international perspective. And that's one of the greatest challenges, because it's all very well when you come and operate in China and having to work to Chinese business practices, which are quite unique and special. And then taking that out into into Europe and the US, it's completely different. And so I think those brands that are going out are having to get the right talent in place to kind of build those more globally focused strategies from a business development perspective, and also from a sort of a brand development perspective as well. But it is happening. There's no doubt about it. We're seeing a lot of Chinese domestic brands who are becoming very sophisticated. Our Chinese consumers now are exceptionally sophisticated. They really have leapfrogged in terms of the usage of technology. They are exceptionally well informed. They research pretty much more than any other consumer. So when they walk into a store, they know their brand. They know what they want to buy. So they're a very complex but very knowledgeable client. So to that end, I think the domestic market in itself is really catching up and enabling brands to sort of experiment with a local consumer, and then also then expand into export markets.
From an India perspective, I think the biggest challenge the Indian firms are facing is actually cost of capital to go into Western Europe and to the US, because it's more expensive. just in terms of capital, in terms of pricing. But the big advantage is that India has always conducted business in English, and the English language is pretty well spoken. So and therefore you've seen a lot of companies expanding into, especially the English-speaking markets, very rapidly. So whether it's the UK, whether it's the US, whether it's down in Australia, also because of the language, talent has been easier in terms of international perspective, because you've traditionally had a lot of Indians in different markets already who've studied to go out to study and have stayed back. So talent is been there, international perspectives have been there. So I think capital, I would say, has been the only stumbling block, but otherwise it's pretty much they're out there.
I'm going to wind up now because I'm getting the nod, but just to say, I think the internationalization of Indian and Chinese and eventually African and Latin American companies is a huge opportunity for the independent agency sector. And don't think because you don't have a global network that you can't chase those clients, because they want localization and they want that deep local knowledge. I just want to say thank you to Julian and his team for another fantastic conference. Thank you to the panel for coming and contributing, and they'll be here if you want to talk to them over lunch. Thank you to all of you for staying the course. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Now lunchtime.
Thank you.